Welcome to another episode of our personal empowerment audio program, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder, and our program today is entitled Learning Tolerance. What are you willing to put up with? What are you unwilling to put up with? What do we tolerate? And understand that tolerating what's wrong, putting up with injustice isn't really tolerance, it's really complicity.
We have to talk about tolerance in the same way we talk about pride. It can go either way. Or anxiety is another one of those words that's confusing. When you say you're anxious, does that mean oh boy or oh no? And if we hear pride goeth before the fall and you shouldn't be prideful, then why is pride an important part of good, healthy self-esteem? We have that same kind of conundrum here. We thought we'd talk about it right at the top with the whole idea of tolerance. If tolerance comes from love and understanding, developing consciousness, or as Steve and I like to say, finding yourself in paradise, that authentic, genuine, true self, then it's got to come from love and understanding. However, to be tolerant, as Steve has said, of some injustice or some cruelty, well, you're doing that because of fear, and we can't really call that tolerance. We need a different word for that. But it's a fine point. I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody talk about tolerance in most cases versus, well, it doesn't apply to tolerating some injustice, you know.
Yeah, tolerating what's wrong because you're afraid to do something about it, that's not really a virtue. It's not something that you want to be prideful about. What we're talking about is the kind of tolerance that makes relationships work better, like letting the little things go, not sweating the small stuff, choosing your battles, learning to tolerate those behaviors that are different from the way you do things. And that's why you find them irritating, because it's not your way of doing things. Learning to tolerate what is done that is different from the way that you do it, but is of no danger, is no threat to you, is the kind of tolerance that we're talking about.
In many ways, this is the golden rule. This is be tolerant of others if you expect them to tolerate your folly and your foolishness. And isn't that really the kind of world we want to live in, or at least the kind of country? If you're living in a democratic country, then you want the freedom, the liberty to be tolerated by people that disagree with you. Well, then you've got to give that if you expect to receive it, I think. And maybe we should even look at going beyond tolerance, Steve, to embracing diversity as something that in most cases makes us rich. The fact that people disagree with us, the fact that there is so much diversity in our culture, in our society, is a good thing by and large, not a bad thing. So what we're really battling is understanding versus the need to be right. And many of our friends and neighbors would rather be right than understand what merit there may be in a different argument. It's not always everything or nothing. It's so frustrating.
In fact, it's very rarely everything or nothing. And, if you think about it from the point of view of being intolerant of differences so that you want everybody to be exactly like you and behave like you and do what you do, now you're talking about a threat to the survival of humanity. Because it's the diversity of human beings, it's the differences that allow us all to survive. Even the tribes in ancient times knew that you have to go mix with other tribes. You can't all be the same kind of people to create the biggest and greatest form of society. So inherently we know that diversity is good. Inherently we know that differences is what makes humanity a special, wonderful thing and has allowed us to survive, has allowed us to continue to evolve. So the idea of tolerating as much differences and as much diversity as possible this side of tolerating what's wrong, tolerating what's illegal or what is injustice.
And going from that perhaps to embracing and even seeking out those differences, those variations. And through that understanding, it seems to me, the fear goes away. I think that, as Emerson said, knowledge is the antidote to fear. Well, knowledge or understanding would be the antidote to intolerance or being afraid of those who might disagree with you.
Or look different or be different than you.
Yeah, the whole idea that I am frightened by what I don't understand is so important in human psychology. And yet again, when we're frightened, we don't seem to have the capacity to realize it's my own confusion, my own stress and anxiety that's preventing me from understanding that this very different point of view does have some merit. Maybe it doesn't have as much merit as mine. Mine's more true than yours, but, I can see where that idea of yours might have just a little bit of truth. And if I could just acknowledge that little bit, now I think we can create some middle ground. And now that's the pluralistic society that I'd like to see America return to, where there really is a middle between the left and right.
Yeah, there was a time when we as Americans were proud of the fact that we were the most diverse nation on the planet. We had Ellis Island bringing people in from every part of the whole planet, and we were excited about being this not one single race, of people. But now it's gotten to the point more and more, I think, politically especially, where it's left or right, it's right or wrong, it's your way or the wrong way, And I think that intolerance for other people's viewpoints, for other people's, the guy screaming out at Obama, you're a liar, the intolerance for other people's ways of being, that's a scary thing, Can
you imagine him yelling out, I disagree with you? Too soft.
Yeah.
It wasn't coming from a reasonable place.
Right.
It was coming from emotion. It came from fear.
And that's where we get confused about tolerating things, because when we're afraid and what frightens us causes us to be paralyzed and not do something, you're not tolerating something when you're paralyzed and you can't do it. You're tolerating something when you're accepting it and could walk away from it. If you have no power to walk away from it, that's not tolerance. That's fear. That's paralysis. So that's what we have to take a look at. What do you tolerate that you could walk away from, and do the ends justify the means? Letting the little things go, sacrificing the small stuff in relationships, not fighting every battle is a really smart thing to do. Finding out how important is this issue to the other person. But tolerating things like, lying or infidelity or stealing, you tolerate that behavior, you're complicit with it, you're co-behaving it, you're supporting it in a way. You cannot tolerate injustice, you cannot tolerate wrong, bad behavior, because that isn't tolerating it at all. It's supporting it, it's making it come true.
The word justice keeps popping into my mind, and I wish there were more concern in our society and in the world in general for this concept of justice. Back in the day, we would go to peace rallies, and often there'd be a chant or a sign someone would carry that would say, no justice, no peace. That if you want peace, you have to work for justice. As long as there is injustice, and we tolerate that or are afraid and confused and look the other way. Again, I don't think tolerance is the right word in that case, but if we put up with that gross injustice, and at least they're not coming for me, right? Well, we are part of the problem. We're not part of the solution. We become part of the greater injustice by looking the other way and pretending, well, I'm way too busy to get involved with that. So to go beyond tolerance, I think, is to work for justice, to recognize that we have to sometimes not only be tolerant of those who disagree with us and have different belief systems, but maybe even, Steve, to go out of our way to find injustices where we can make some sort of positive contribution. It could be a little thing. And to stop fighting unnecessary wars, but to go in with a Peace Corps type of program and these aid projects that we've done in the past to make a positive contribution. This, to me, is a way of creating the justice that's necessary for there to be peace in the world. If we get that fixed, if we work for justice to create peace, then it's going to be so much easier to be tolerant and feel safe in the presence of people we disagree with. But in a war environment where everybody's on edge and the best way to defend yourself is with torture and throwing out habeas corpus after 900 years of, well, you need to be charged with a crime after all. that obviously is the wrong path and the wrong direction. And I'm still one who says this is not partisan. This is not left, right, Republican, conservative. That we got off in that ditch, I think, is understandable after 9/11. We were afraid. Let's be afraid no more. Let's work for justice, that we might have peace, that we can then tolerate. Is that a stretch, or does that make sense to you?
No, I think it makes sense. You have to be intolerant of injustice to become tolerant and feel safe.
Yeah.
So as long as we allow injustice to go on, it could happen to us. As long as, they came for the Jews, but I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't. They came for the
gay guys,
the gay
or whatever,
guys,
when I was straight, so I didn't say anything.
Yeah, the gypsies, whatever it was next, and yeah, so
and then they came for me.
And then they came for me. As long as you allow injustice to continue to exist, not that you could wave a magic wand and make it disappear all by yourself, but not contributing at all is complicit. Not contributing at all is supporting it, is co-behaving. The behavior of injustice is okay. So the first thing we have to do is like understand in our side of ourselves, what will I not put up with? And where do I draw my line?
My personal line.
My personal line.
Right.
Like I allow people to get away with stuff. I'm pretty easygoing in that way. But there's a point. Like if you do this to me, then that's it. We are no longer going to be in a relationship with each other. And I've had that happen a couple of times in my life with very close friends who did really horrible things, and that's crossing the line. You can't do that anymore.
Question is, was it a reaction or a response? Did you just, react reflexively and get angry and shut them out of your life, or did you reflect upon it and choose a even-tempered?
Yeah.
Well, knowing you, it was probably the latter.
It was, in both cases, there was a long process of dissolution between me and this other person.
So you did it consciously.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
I don't think we can even use the word tolerance or intolerance if we're talking about gross injustice. I don't think that we could even say tolerating injustice. That to me is denial.
Yeah,
is what that is, or some sort of avoidance behavior. Says, it's not my problem, man. Racism is not my problem. Third world hunger doesn't bother me. I got a Safeway right up the street. Not my problem. It is our problem, and increasingly is becoming our problem as the globe shrinks, and what is anybody's problem now is everybody's problem.
And somebody said it so succinctly. I mean, the problem is that if you rate everybody on an economic scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being the richest and 1 being the poorest, the problem is that the 10s would rather become 11s than help the 1s become 2s. That's really the problem. And I've always said philanthropy is the answer. Once we can't tolerate hunger anymore, once we can't tolerate the kind of injustice that leaves people without survival, once we are unwilling to tolerate that as a species, philanthropy will be the vehicle that will solve that problem with.
People are funny. I don't know who gets credit for this statement, but I read it not long ago, something about, isn't it odd that most people are more concerned with appearing silly than unjust?
Yeah.
It's not a high priority for us yet. I think generally the human species just hasn't really evolved to the point where we're putting a high number on justice.
Yeah, well, when somebody buys a huge company and then lays off 3/4 of the people because they can make money, there's no justice. There are circumstances where maybe that's the appropriate thing to do, but generally speaking, it seems to me that they're not feeling whether it's important to be just or unjust. What's important is how much is the bottom line that I can show the investors in my company or the board of directors. So justice doesn't play a major role in politics or in the corporate world. There's a whole lot of places that justice is like, well, if we cross the line and we do something illegal, that's one thing. But anything I can get away with, anything I can push up to the line, it doesn't matter if it's just or not. If it's not illegal, I'm going to do it. My wife used to talk about how somebody she used to know you'd draw a line in the sand and he'd blow on it and make it disappear so he could step over it. It's like some people, as long as it's not illegal, it doesn't matter who gets hurt.
So they're deliberately pushing the envelope.
Yeah.
That's their test of personal development, is to see what I can get away with?
I think there's a lot of people who are living like, what's the most I can do, get, be. Doesn't matter who I step on or who I hurt or who I have to push out of the way to get there.
Yeah, I was thinking about priorities the other day in a political sense, but then as we both tend to do, wandered into personal development and, deeper existential questions. And the phrase "for love nor money" came into my head. And I thought, for love or money? That's like people or property. And then I thought, well, that's almost like the heart and the head.
Yeah.
Like, what are you motivated by? If
what you think about or what you care about.
Yeah. What you think about or what you care about. Love or money, people or profits. Well,
the longing for love or the struggle for the legal tender.
There you go. Same thing. The love you make is equal to the love you take. We can go round and round with this, but the duality of that, I tend to avoid either ors because we make so much of the middle and the essential nature of that third way, that middle way, which is really a full spectrum between extremes. And I always will, but to define the extremes, nevertheless. Okay, so I like a little money, but I also want some love in my life. And when I'm looking at my political priorities or the kind of society I want to live in, the nature of socioeconomics, education, personal and social and political development, we could call it that, I want a little of both. But I certainly know at this point in my life that given a choice of one or the other, I'm not coming down on the 50-yard line. I'm tending toward the love over the money. I like money. I like stuff, Everybody should have a car that starts when you turn the key and gets good mileage and shelter, a roof that doesn't leak, and clothes that keep you warm on a chilly day. But we have so much that maybe what we're trying to fill is not an empty shelf or an empty garage, but an empty heart. And if we knew that, or as we come to understand that and recognize directly that that's the longing, that's the urge that we're trying to fill by buying more and more and more and feeling like we're on a treadmill, then I think we can say, well, I'm in the middle, but it's not the 50-yard line between love and money and the head and the heart. I favor these intangible things that money can't buy. I have no doubt that in the United States and in the world in general, that's the direction we're moving in. It's just, like Tom Petty says, the waiting's the hardest part.
Indeed. And, there's several levels. There are people who, consciously, purposely really hate what they're doing in their lives, and they aren't tolerating it, but they're doing it because they don't know what else to do. It's not like I'm tolerating it, I'm just stuck, I'm just so afraid of the thought of doing anything else that I'm stuck doing this. There are people who do tolerate what they do. They don't love it, but they're tolerating it, knowing that something better is coming. Like I'm in school knowing I'm going to get a degree, or I'm working my way up to a position in this company that I want, and I'll put up with what I've got now because something better is on the horizon. And I think the ultimate expression of being tolerant is a great relationship where you put up with all kinds of foibles and all kinds of behaviors that your spouse does that you would do differently or aren't the easiest things for you to handle, but you let the little things go. You don't sweat the small stuff. You choose your battles very carefully and learning to be tolerant of that. But I think it's really, really important that each of us understand clearly inside of our own heart is where do we draw the line? Where are we intolerant? What are we not willing to be tolerant of? What behaviors do we say, no, that crosses the line. I'm unwilling to be in a relationship or be with a person who behaves in that particular way. You got to recognize that for yourself. You got to it's the worry once principle. Like what's the worst possible scenario that I'd be willing to live with, and beyond that, what would I do?
Well, if we've talked about the global and the social and the political here in the United States, let's talk about group dynamics and family and friends and the personal stuff. What is it in our personal lives that we just won't tolerate? I put my finger to my forehead and the first thing comes up for me is lying. I have a high number on being lied to. And again, that's a gross injustice, or being lied about. slandered, I think, is even a more severe lie. But I just don't like being deceived. I'd rather you tell me the truth. You can do it diplomatically. You can do it gently without causing unnecessary harm. I think we're all called upon to do that, and if we want to be told the truth, then we've got to initiate that by, well, thoughts are magnetic and feelings are magnetic, to be attracted to you or to be repelled from you. Positive thoughts bring us toward positive thoughts, and it's odd. It seems spiritual polarity is reversed from electrical polarity, where opposites attract.
Indeed.
But spiritually, or in terms of personality, why are we attracted to the people we're attracted to?
Clearly, opposites don't attract. Evil people do not attract good people. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that way.
No. Although, in matching ourselves up with people who we're attracted to, sometimes we find that they're able to complement some part of us.
Right, compliments rather than opposites. That's a better word.
Yeah, I think that is a better word. But I bring it all up because we can learn a lot about ourselves by reflecting upon what in others do we have difficulty with.
Indeed.
Where we're tolerating that which we perhaps should not be tolerating. Am I going to allow myself to be lied to, even just a little bit, because I want to avoid an argument, or because I want to avoid upsetting a third party over here or somebody else? And so we just get into these avoidance behaviors, the denial we mentioned before, and darn it, doesn't that just end up compounding the problem in the long run?
Indeed. And when it comes to something like being lied to, we all have our different lines that we draw. For example, there are people that I would not accept being lied to. You wouldn't lie to me, my wife wouldn't lie to me, and I would not accept a lie, wouldn't tolerate being lied to by either of you. But if I'm walking down the street and I see somebody I casually know and say, "How you doing?" and they say, "Fine," and that's a lie, I can live with that. I don't really have a problem with people lying to me that I don't really have. The one that I won't tolerate, that I draw my line, is violence. I mean, under any circumstances, human beings physically hurting, hitting, attacking, biting, kicking, punching, I just don't get it. I never did it, and I just don't get it, and I don't tolerate it. People who behave that way are not going to be part of my life. I mean, you can lose your temper and scream and yell and stuff, but when you start throwing punches or when you start kicking people, there's a line for me. I won't tolerate that. I will put up with a whole lot of other behaviors. I mean, I'm a very easygoing guy, and I'll put up with all kinds of behaviors that I think are stupid, and by stupid I don't mean low intelligence. I mean like deer in headlights, stupefied, like bad decisions or careless mistakes. I'll put up with people who make mistakes. But what I won't put up with is people who continually make the same mistake over and over again, or people who resort to violence. Those are two that really bother me a lot.
Let's consider for a minute the Museum of Tolerance in Washington, D.C. And this is put up largely by Jewish contributors in the wake of the Holocaust, that we might remember, learn a lesson, and make sure it doesn't ever happen again. So in being tolerant of people who disagree with us, I think, again, the point we want to underscore is that the tendency to be intolerant comes from confusion and maybe even some hatred, but in either and both cases, that's rooted in ignorance, misunderstanding. So anybody that says or behaves in such a way as to indicate I hate or dislike this whole group of people based on their ethnicity, the way they look, their belief systems, their language, their custom, the food. I don't even like their food. I don't like any. That, to me, is a red flag that says you don't know anything about this culture. Because if you did know the culture better, you'd find something not only to like and tolerate, but something to embrace and love that would really enrich you. And then you might find a few other things which, like your own culture, you don't really care for that much. That, to me, is much more likely than remaining segregated as a world. And this is a big problem right now, not just in the United States, but in many places of the world. Third world people are migrating, looking for jobs and decent level of pay. And to be able to support themselves. And the people, the haves, then might see the have-nots as some sort of threat, as if there's not enough to go around. And there's another mindset that we have to face. We have to not be intolerant of, but also not be in denial or avoidance. There's plenty to go around. Anytime we believe we're dealing with shortage, it's likely we're coming from fear. And if we educate ourselves and understand, we can do more with less. We can be much more efficient. We have the resources on the planet Earth to feed 5 times the population we have here if we had better land management. But with private property, a big corporation can own all the land, and the people that work on the land are paid a pittance, and they don't get the benefit. I mean, land in the third world that should be feeding hungry people is often used to grow expensive cash crops for export to the United States and Europe. Well, that's not fair. That's not right. And if people had access to the land, what's more fundamental than that? I'm back to justice, aren't I? No justice, no peace. And without peace, I don't think we can have the understanding and the tolerance that we're talking about learning in and developing in this program today.
Yeah, so tolerance comes from knowing, from understanding, from knowledge, and intolerance comes from fear and ignorance. Is it fear or is it ignorance? I'm afraid I don't know, but it's both or one of those two. And
what's the difference?
Well, it's a good question. So
I mean, isn't all fear of the unknown?
Yeah, and so the answer is always no. Well, they always learn, grow, understand, investigate, find out, get more knowledge. So whenever we're intolerant of something, the first thing we want to do is learn more about it. In essence, what we're suggesting is to learn tolerance in terms of the closest relationship you have, see what it is that you're willing to put up with, see what it is that you're willing to sacrifice in order to get the ends justifying the means, see what you're not willing to tolerate. And as a society, other than those things that are injustice, all of the things that are wrong, learning to tolerate what's odd, what's unusual, what's different, what's strange, comes through learning about it. It's easier, the more you know, the less intolerant you become. Didn't Paul McCartney say something like, I used to think lots of things were weird, but what I realized is the people that are weird are the people that think things are weird, something like that. So the idea is everything's weird, and it's good that everything's weird. That other wonderful quote, there's so much good in the worst of us and so much bad in the best of us that it behooves all of us to ignore the rest of us,
You just reminded me of a couple that I counseled a long time ago, maybe 20 years or more ago. For sure more than 20 years ago, now that I think about it. And they were 2 of the most eccentric individuals, this man and his wife, this woman and her husband, right? I mean, either of them alone, you'd stop and take a second look just because of the way they dress or their immediate appearance and then the way they acted. And they were having marriage problems. And, at some point in the very first session, I said, look, you two must recognize how, I think eccentric is the word that I used, or how rare each of you are as individuals. You have so much in common in that way that you found each other, right? You ought to cherish that. And they looked at each other and they cracked up. They knew exactly what I was talking about.
She's strange. He's strange.
Yeah, we understand each of us is a little weird. I mean, look who I'm hooked up with, right? And it was darling. It was really wonderful. And as I think even further about it, Steve, I think maybe that's the best place of all. Our romantic relationships, our marriages, to look at this idea of tolerance. I just love onions sautéed in my scrambled eggs and my omelets, and my wife loves onions everywhere but in eggs. And doesn't sound like a big important thing, and it's really not, but it's an example of I'll leave the onions out. I don't have that high a number on it. If I can make my wife happy on that, then, But there are other areas where it's not always that easy. If we both have a high number on something. One thing that our listeners can look at is the struggle over the TV remote control, right? How do you work that out? Are you tolerant of watching your partner's programs, even the ones that you don't really like or care for, and vice versa? How do you work that out? How are we going to have peace in the world if husband and wife can't get together on who controls the remote and when and how? And to best make these compromises, we have to come out of respect and love and understanding. And I think that just underscores the point you've made, which is to become more tolerant and even to work for peace and justice. We have to come from the understanding that really is capital L, love, as consciousness, an awareness that says, I would rather understand all these diverse positions and opinions, even the ones I do not agree with or think I do not agree with. I'd rather understand than be right and ignorant. And what an important milestone in life to begin to give up that need to be right, that childish, I'll say, need to be right, to prove the point. See, I told you so, to get the last word. To be able to give that up in favor of the wonderful feeling of, I understand. I don't really agree. I wouldn't do it that way, but, oh, I get it now.
There was a wonderful line. Tom Petty said, she can understand my problems. She lets the little things go. I think that says it so wonderfully. That's what tolerance is all
That's
about.
Sweet.
I think, in a relationship. And letting things go, I think, is a great theme for the audio journey that we're about to do. So,
nice segue.
Letting go of physical tension, letting go of emotional anxiety, letting go of mental confusion.
Letting go of the need to be right.
Letting go of the need to be right, and starting with taking and holding, and then letting go of one slow, conscious, deep breath. Take it in and release. Find your center. Find your place of paradise, your place of perfect peace.
To know your feelings better and to think for yourself, you have to feel safe. And so create and sense that feeling of safety as muscles relaxing and unwinding. Drop the physical tension in your muscles and feel the letting go from head to toe and back again. Actually put your awareness on that letting go feeling in your body. Pretend you're safe. Remember a time in your life, whether recent or long ago, that you felt really, really safe and relaxed. And your emotional nature became still and tranquil, and the mental nature quiet and focused. Focused upon understanding as a quality of love, of consciousness. Acknowledging within you the longing, even the urge to understand. Seeking wisdom as superior to the need to be right. And ask yourself, do I really need to always be right? Correct? Do I need to make those who disagree with me, no matter to what degree, do I need to make them wrong and then tell them about it or prove it to them? Or can I right now, with my eyes closed, feel safe and relaxed enough to understand the merit in points of view with which you disagree? To continue, perhaps, to disagree, though to find yourself changing your perspective somewhat maybe you still do disagree. Maybe you'd still rather see it this way or do it that way. But the safer and more relaxed you feel, the more tolerant you are of those different ideas.
So feel safe enough to tolerate what's different, to tolerate a stranger, for you know there is no danger. Feel safe enough to tolerate what's different, to tolerate what's stranger, for you know there is no danger. You feel safe. And tolerance grows as safety flows through you. It's easy to feel safe when you know there is no danger. And what's different, no matter how much stranger, represents no danger. Only that which is injustice, only that which is wrong, only that which just makes you feel like you've got to stand up strong and say, no, that's what you don't tolerate. You can't tolerate what's wrong. But it's powerful inside of you. In fact, you'll feel very, very strong if you can tolerate what's different, tolerate what's unique, tolerate what's other than you, speaking other than the way you speak, looking other than the way you look, feeling other than the way you feel. Learning to tolerate differences has tremendous appeal.
To find your authentic self in paradise, in this alpha brainwave level of relaxation, of focused passion, is to expand your awareness, to improve your ability to realize that which may have been just beyond your grasp when you were in normal levels of awareness, but multitasking, too many thoughts competing for your attention, too many feelings all mixed up for you to really understand yourself. But in this paradise, you can find a personal peace that allows you to tolerate yourself by better understanding yourself. Begin here. And then empathize with others. If somebody, for example, cuts you off in traffic instead of immediately, reflexively reacting, take a breath and relax and consider that there's a pretty good chance they did not intend to do that. In fact, there's a pretty good likelihood they don't even know what they did. And then suggest to yourself, isn't it also then just as likely that you've done the same thing, cut people off, didn't know that you did that because it wasn't apparent to you and it was not your intention. If you can forgive yourself, then you can forgive others. If you can work for a calm conscience and internal peace in this place, then you can grant that peace and justice to others and be tolerant of them, perhaps not even needing to ever know whether they intended to appear this way or not. Tolerance is the middle as well as the opposite. It's every permutation, combination, and variation that is different from yours. And most of them are okay. To learn to be more tolerant is to be more peaceful, to develop your ability to understand and realize and to promote justice and peace in a world that not only tolerates diversity, but respects diversity and embraces diversity as enriching.
So sometimes it's important to be tolerant and cut other people some slack. But sometimes it's important to push a little bit and get people back on the right track. Putting up with what isn't working is not a solution for the long term at all. Being tolerant of what is acceptable, for that, you'll take no fall. But being tolerant of what is unacceptable, pushing yourself beyond what's okay, and you do damage to your psyche, and you'll be worse in many ways. So decide, what are you willing to accept and to deny? What is it that crosses the line? You have to ask yourself, why am I willing to put up with this behavior and not that one over there? You've got to understand and draw the line, not some fantasy in the air, but understand, this is what I can do, this is what I can permit, and this is where I won't do it anymore. This is where I quit. Understand what you will tolerate and where you'll draw that line. Get it clearly defined inside of your mind.
Wherever there is intolerance in your life, there will be confusion and misunderstanding. Seek to understand truly, deeply, and honestly, and you will not only tolerate the differences that used to frighten you, you'll embrace them and bring them with you gently in appreciation for diversity in beauty, for diversity in truth, for diversity in goodness that enriches you. Bring that sense of a good and true and beautiful world because of its diversity and our tolerance of those that may at first glance confuse us and frighten us. As you reorient yourself toward the sound of our voices.
And as it feels comfortable, becoming aware of the here and the now, with a deep breath, bring yourself back to wide awake.
Feeling fine, feeling good, all refreshed and rested, and understanding more than you did 10 minutes ago. That's really what it's about. That's an amazing word, to really stand under something and get the big picture, to understand it, to realize it. I like that word as well.
Yeah, tolerance is a pretty big subject, too. I mean, and what it comes down to is I think we have to tolerate all that we can tolerate, and what's intolerable is people who are intolerating.
And respond to all of our fear with a desire to understand, not eliminate. You know, just because you don't understand something doesn't mean you got to kill it or drop a bomb on it. You know, war is the way we seem to deal still with international tensions, and we do the same thing in our bodies with viruses. Instead of seeking balance, we use antibiotics to kill the bacteria, if not the virus. And we do the same thing in the garden. Oh no, an aphid, get out the 7, kill everything. Well, that's not the best way to handle our relationships with people or our relationship with our body, staying healthy. And I don't think that's the best relationship to have with food that you're going to eat, to spray poison on it to keep those tiny little bugs away. You got to rethink all of this. And harmony is a word we haven't talked about, but that certainly is part of all of this. Harmony and understanding, I think, go side by side, hand in hand. and tolerance too. They all go together as qualities of love, actually, or awareness.
And of course, intolerance always comes from the fear place, from the lack of understanding, the lack of knowing. So if there's things that you would like to know, we've got 101 shows in the can now with all kinds of information on all kinds of topics. Just come back to focuspassion.com and check out the Unpurchased podcasts. Maybe there's something you're going through in your life right now that we've got a program that would just solve your problem or heal your heart. So give it a check. And, of course, remember, you can always send one to a friend. Anything that's in your library, you can send to as many people as you want, as often as you want, whenever you want.
Hey, thanks so much for being with us this week, and stay tuned. We'll have another program for you every week in the stream that is Finding Yourself in Paradise. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner. Be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. And aloha from Maui.